What begins as a peaceful afternoon in a quiet park turns into a life-altering moment for Rachel Carter, a respected civil rights attorney. Targeted without cause by two officers, she is thrust into the very system she spent her career fighting against. But this isn't just a story of one wrongful arrest. It's the opening chapter of a much larger battle. As Rachel digs deeper, she uncovers a web of corruption and abuse that runs far deeper than she ever imagined. With evidence mounting and her enemies growing desperate, the stakes become personal. Threats escalate, alliances are tested, and the line between friend and foe begins to blur. What will Rachel uncover as she pulls at the threads of this conspiracy? Can she stay one step ahead of those determined to silence her? And when the truth finally comes to light, will justice prevail, or will the system crush her under its weight? The sun-bathed Riverview Park in a golden glow as families laughed and children raced each other along the winding paths. Rachel Carter sat on a bench near the duck pond, the weight of a thick legal textbook resting in her lap. This rare break from her demanding job as a civil rights attorney was supposed to be peaceful. The screech of tires shattered the tranquility. A patrol car pulled to the curb, and two officers, Cole Matthews and Brian Adams, stepped out. Their expressions were hard, their eyes scanning the area, before locking on Rachel, the only person sitting alone. "Ma'am," Matthews called, his voice sharp and authoritative. "We need to speak with you." Rachel's brow furrowed, but her calm exterior didn't waver. "Of course," she said, closing her book deliberately. Adams approached, his hand hovering near his belt. "We got a report of suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Rachel tilted her head. "Suspicious activity?" she asked, holding up her book. "I'm reading. Is that a problem?" "Let's see some ID," Matthews demanded, his tone making it clear this was more than routine. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let her composure falter. "I'm not sure what I've done to warrant this level of attention," Rachel said carefully. "It's routine," Adams replied curtly, though his posture suggested otherwise. With a sigh, Rachel reached into her bag and handed over her driver's license. Matthews examined it as if searching for a hidden crime. "Rachel Carter," he read aloud. "What's your business here, Miss Carter?" "I live here," Rachel replied, her tone even. "I came to enjoy the park. Is that against the law?" The officers exchanged a look. "We'll see," Matthews muttered, handing her ID back but not leaving. The questions kept coming, each one more invasive than the last. "Do you always carry books like that?" Adams sneered. "Are you alone? Waiting for someone?" Rachel had faced hostile cross-examinations in courtrooms, but this was different. There was no judge to mediate, no jury to sway. "Unless you're charging me with something, I'd like to leave," she said firmly. Adams stepped closer. "Don't get smart with us," he snapped. Rachel stood her ground. "I know my rights. Sitting in a public park isn't a crime." Matthews suddenly grabbed her arm. "You're resisting!" he barked, twisting her wrist as he snapped handcuffs into place. "What are you doing?" Rachel exclaimed, shock flooding her voice. The small crowd of onlookers gasped, a few pulling out their phones to record. A young woman with curly hair caught Rachel's eye, silently promising to document the injustice. "Stop resisting!" Matthews shouted louder, as if the growing audience required a performance. Rachel was led to the cruiser, the cuffs biting into her wrists. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the injustice burning in her chest. As the car door slammed shut, she caught one last glance at the young woman filming. Inside the cramped back seat, Rachel stared at her reflection in the glass. The attorney turned defendant. The irony wasn't lost on her. The ride to the station was suffocating silent. Her mind raced, replaying every moment. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who'd been silenced or humiliated without cause. The booking process was invasive and humiliating, designed to strip her of her dignity. Fingerprinting, mugshots, A cell with buzzing fluorescent lights. One of the officers smirked as he closed the door. "Enjoy your stay." Rachel sat on the cold bench, her hands trembling not with fear, but with simmering determination. Hours later, a young officer approached her cell, clipboard in hand. "Miss Carter, you're charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice." "On what grounds?" Rachel demanded. "You can discuss that in court," he replied flatly, turning away. When she was finally released on bail, Rachel emerged into the cool night air, her wrists still aching. Marissa King, her best friend and fellow attorney, was waiting by the curb. "Are you okay?" Marissa asked, her voice tight with concern. "I'm fine," Rachel replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her. As they drove, Rachel stared out the window, her mind already spinning with plans. "I'm not letting this slide," she said firmly. Marissa's grip on the wheel tightened. "What are you thinking?" "I'm tired of this," Rachel said. "I've spent my career fighting for justice in court. Now it's personal." That night, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and law books. Her hands shook not from fear, but from sheer determination. The fight ahead would be brutal, but she was ready. What she didn't know was that her battle for justice would uncover secrets far deeper than she ever imagined. Rachel sat in her office the next morning, her desk buried under files and legal pads. The glow of her desk lamp illuminated the tired lines on her face, etched there by a sleepless night spent combing through statutes and precedents. This wasn't just a fight for her dignity. It was a battle against a broken system. Marissa leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed. "You've barely slept," she said. Rachel didn't look up. "I don't have time to sleep. If I don't prepare, they'll bury me in technicalities and lies." Marissa walked in and set down 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I get it, but don't burn out before you even step into the ring." Rachel finally met her friend's gaze, her voice steady, but strained. "They're counting on me to give up, Marissa. I won't." Marissa sighed, pulling out a chair. "Then let's strategize. What do we know?" Rachel flipped open her notebook. "First, the arrest was baseless. Second, there's a video. It's our strongest piece of evidence." Marissa nodded. "But you need more than that to prove systemic issues. We have to show this isn't just about you. It's about patterns." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Patterns meant other victims, other stories, other lives disrupted by the same officers. Rachel's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Frowning, she picked it up. "This is Rachel Carter." A hesitant voice responded. "Miss Carter, my name is Ethan Davis. I saw the video of your arrest." Rachel's heart quickened. "Ethan, thank you for reaching out. How can I help you?" "It's not about me," he said. "It's about them, those officers. They hurt me too." Marissa perked up, mouthing, "Who is it?" Rachel gestured for her to wait. "Ethan, can you tell me what happened?" There was a pause on the other end. "Not over the phone," Ethan said. "Can we meet? Tonight?" Rachel glanced at Marissa, who nodded. "Where?" "I'll text you the address," Ethan said quickly, before hanging up. Rachel set her phone down and exhaled. "We've got a lead, someone with a story to tell." Marissa frowned. "Be careful. If this is connected to those officers, they might not take kindly to someone speaking out." That evening, Rachel drove to a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a ghostly glow on the cracked pavement. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grease. Ethan was easy to spot, a young man in his early 20s, fidgeting nervously in a corner booth. Rachel slid into the seat across from him. "Ethan?" she asked gently. He nodded, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I almost didn't call." "I'm glad you did," Rachel replied. "Take your time." Ethan's gaze darted around the diner before he spoke. "It happened 3 months ago. I was driving home late one night when they pulled me over, Officers Matthews and Adams." Rachel stiffened. They said I ran a stop sign, but I didn't. I know I didn't, Ethan continued, his voice trembling. They made me get out of the car, started asking all these weird questions where I was going, if I had anything to hide. Rachel leaned in. What happened next? They slammed me against the hood, Ethan said, his voice breaking. Said I was resisting. I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. Rachel's stomach churned. The parallels to her own arrest were chilling. Did you file a complaint? She asked. Ethan shook his head. What was the point? It's their word against mine. Who'd believe me? I do, Rachel said firmly. And I can help you, Ethan. But I need you to be willing to share your story. Ethan hesitated, his fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the table. What if they come after me? What if… The diner door jingled as someone entered. Ethan's eyes widened, and he froze. Rachel turned to see a man in a baseball cap scanning the room. Ethan? Rachel whispered. Do you know him? Ethan nodded, his face pale. He's one of them. Off duty, but that's Adams. Rachel's pulse raced as she turned back to Ethan. Stay calm. Don't look at him. Adams didn't seem to notice them at first. He approached the counter, ordered a coffee, and leaned casually against it. But then his gaze swept the room, and his eyes landed on Rachel. Her stomach dropped. Adams's lips curled into a smirk as he tipped his coffee cup in mock salute. Let's go, Rachel said quickly. She grabbed Ethan's arm and guided him toward the side exit. They slipped into the night air, the door closing softly behind them. Rachel's car was parked nearby. Get in, she instructed, her voice low but urgent. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, his hands trembling. Rachel slid behind the wheel and started the engine. Are we safe? Ethan asked, his voice shaking. For now, Rachel said. But inside, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her or Ethan anymore. It was about stopping men like Adams from abusing their power ever again. Back at her apartment, Rachel paced the living room, her mind racing. Ethan's story was the tip of the iceberg, she was sure of it. But how deep did it go? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marissa. Hey, Rachel answered. Something's comes up, Marissa said. I found a few old complaints against Matthews and Adams. They were buried, but they're there. Rachel's breath caught. How buried? Deep, Marissa replied. Someone didn't want them to see the light of day, but there's more. A third officer filed an internal report about misconduct against Matthews. Rachel stopped pacing. Who? His name's Jake Daniels, a rookie, Rachel frowned. Why would a rookie go against his own unit? Marissa hesitated. Maybe he's different, or maybe he's trying to cover his own tracks. Rachel's mind raced. A rookie whistleblower could be an ally or a trap. Either way, she needed answers. Rachel sat at her desk, staring at the name written across her notepad. Officer Jake Daniels. A rookie willing to speak out against his own colleagues was rare, but it was also dangerous. She needed to tread carefully. Marissa's voice broke the silence. If Daniels filed an internal report, it could mean two things. He's either genuinely trying to do the right thing, or he's playing both sides. Rachel nodded, still deep in thought. I need to talk to him. Marissa raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to do that? He's not exactly going to chat over coffee about corruption in his department. Rachel tapped her pen on the desk. If he filed that report, he might already be feeling isolated. If I can convince him that exposing the truth is the right thing to do, he might help us. Marissa sighed. Just be careful, Rachel. If he's working with Matthews and Adams, you could be walking into a trap. Later that afternoon, Rachel sat in her car outside the precinct where Daniels worked. She'd done her research. Daniels was fresh out of the academy, with less than 2 years on the force. His record was clean, but his decision to file a report against his superiors had likely painted a target on his back. She watched the entrance until a young man stepped out, his uniform crisp, his movements stiff. That had to be him. Taking a deep breath, Rachel got out of her car and approached him. "Officer Daniels?" she called. He turned, his expression wary. "Yes?" "My name is Rachel Carter," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I'm a civil rights attorney." Daniels stiffened. "If this is about a case, you'll need to go through official channels." "This isn't about a case," Rachel said, her tone calm but firm. "It's about you. I know you filed a report against Officers Matthews and Adams." Daniel's eyes darted to the precinct, then back to Rachel. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have copies of the complaints," Rachel pressed. "I know the risks you're taking, and I know what it's like to stand up to people who think they're untouchable." Daniels hesitated, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand what you're asking me to do." "Help me," Rachel said simply. "Not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt. You're already in this, Daniels. The question is, are you going to see it through?" Daniels looked down, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, Rachel thought he might walk away, but then he exhaled sharply. "Not here," he said. "Follow me." Daniels led her to a small diner a few blocks from the precinct. They sat in a corner booth, away from the other patrons. Daniels rubbed his temples, as though the weight of what he was about to say physically pained him. "I joined the force to make a difference," he began, his voice low. "But it didn't take long to see how things really work. Guys like Matthews and Adams, they don't just bend the rules, they break them. And they get away with it because no one has the guts to stand up to them." "Why did you?" Rachel asked. Daniels hesitated. "Because I saw something I couldn't ignore. 3 months ago, they brought in a kid, Ethan Davis. They said he resisted arrest, but he didn't. They roughed him up, called it procedure, and wrote it off like it was nothing." Rachel felt a pang of anger. "That matches what Ethan told me." Daniels nodded grimly. "I filed a report, thinking the system would do the right thing. Instead, it got buried, and I got labeled a snitch. Now they're watching my every move." Rachel leaned forward. "If you have proof anything at all, we can use it. Testimonies, footage, records." Daniels shook his head. "They're careful. They don't leave a trail. But there's one thing you should know." Rachel's breath caught. "What?" Daniels glanced around, lowering his voice. "Matthews isn't just a bad cop. He's connected. There's a network protecting guys like him. Internal affairs won't touch him, and anyone who tries gets burned." The implication sent a chill down Rachel's spine. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of looking the other way," Daniels said, his voice trembling. "And because I believe you can do what I can't." Rachel studied him, trying to gauge the sincerity in his eyes. She saw fear, but she also saw resolve. "You're taking a huge risk by talking to me." Daniels nodded. "I know, but if you're going to take them down, you need to know what you're up against. These guys play dirty, and they don't care who they hurt." Rachel's mind raced. "Is there anyone else in the department who might back you up?" Daniels hesitated. "There's one person, Officer Rivera. She's been here longer than me and keeps her head down, but I've seen her questioning their tactics. If anyone else knows what's going on, it's her." Rachel made a mental note. "Thank you, Daniels. You've just given me a place to start." As Rachel drove home, her thoughts swirled. Matthews's connections, the buried complaints, the growing web of corruption. It was bigger than she'd anticipated. But Daniels's courage gave her hope. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, letting the day's revelations sink in. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marissa. "Found something you need to see. Call me." Rachel dialed immediately. "What did you find?" "There's a pattern," Marissa said without preamble. "Over the last 5 years, Matthews and Adams have been involved in at least 6 complaints of excessive force. None of them went anywhere." "Because they were buried," Rachel muttered. "Exactly," Marissa replied, "and it gets worse. One of the complainants died in what was ruled an accident. But the timing is suspicious." Rachel's stomach turned. "Who?" "Daryl Harris," Marissa said. He was a witness in one of their cases. His death was ruled a hit and run, but there were no leads, no suspects. It just disappeared. Rachel clenched the phone. "We need to dig deeper." "Already on it," Marissa said. "But Rachel, be careful. This is starting to look less like police misconduct and more like a cover-up." Rachel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The fight was no longer just about her or Ethan. It was about dismantling a system that thrived on fear and silence. "Let them come," she said quietly. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." Rachel leaned against her car in the parking lot outside a coffee shop, her phone pressed to her ear. Marissa's voice crackled on the other end. "Rivera is clean, as far as I can tell," Marissa said. "She's got a solid record, no disciplinary actions, no obvious connections to Matthews or Adams." "That doesn't mean she'll talk," Rachel replied, her eyes scanning the street. "True, but Daniels trusted her enough to name-drop. That's a start." Rachel nodded to herself. "I'll reach out. Worst case, she shuts me down." Marissa hesitated. "And worst case, she tips them off." The thought lingered in Rachel's mind as she ended the call and stepped into the coffee shop. Rivera was already there, sitting at a corner table. She was mid-30s, with a sharp, no-nonsense air about her. Rachel approached cautiously. "Officer Rivera?" Rivera looked up, her expression guarded. "You must be Carter. Daniel said you might contact me." Rachel sat across from her, placing her hands flat on the table. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this is a risk," Rivera shrugged. "Everything's a risk in this job. Daniel said you're digging into Matthews and Adams." "I am," Rachel said, "and I need your help." Rivera's gaze narrowed. "Do you know what you're asking? Matthews and Adams have been untouchable for years. Complaints disappear. Witnesses back out. It's not a coincidence." "I know," Rachel said, "but I also know people like you join the force to make a difference. Daniel said you've questioned their methods before." Rivera exhaled, her fingers tapping on the edge of her coffee cup. "Questioning and acting aren't the same thing. People who act end up ostracized or worse." Rachel leaned forward. "I've seen worse. I've lived it. But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone they've hurt and will keep hurting if no one stops them." Rivera stared at her for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "There's a storage room in the precinct where evidence gets lost. Files, recordings, complaints, they all disappear in there. If you can get access, you might find something." Rachel's heart skipped. "Why are you telling me this?" Rivera's jaw tightened. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening, but I can't do it alone. If you expose them, it might actually make a difference." Later that night, Rachel sat in her office, processing Rivera's words. A secret storage room for lost evidence was exactly the kind of lead she needed, but it came with challenges. Accessing it would require more than legal maneuvering. It would take someone on the inside. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock at the door. Startled, she stood and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Delivery," a voice replied. Rachel frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark hoodie holding a small package. Against her better judgment, she opened the door a crack. The man shoved the package into her hands and walked away without a word. Rachel closed the door, her pulse quickening. She placed the box on her desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a flash drive. The note read, "Stop digging, or this gets worse for you." Her hands shook as she plugged the flash drive into her laptop. A video file popped up. She clicked it, and her screen filled with grainy footage of Ethan's arrest. The recording was clear. Ethan, compliant and terrified, being slammed against the hood of his car while Matthews and Adams barked orders. Her breath caught. It wasn't just evidence, it was a threat. Someone knew she'd spoken to Ethan, and was trying to silence her. Rachel grabbed her phone and called Marissa. "Someone just sent me a video of Ethan's arrest," she said, her voice trembling. "What? Who?" Marissa demanded. "I don't know," Rachel replied. But the message was clear. "Back off." Marissa cursed under her breath. "This isn't random. They know you're getting close." "I'm not stopping," Rachel said firmly. "This video proves what they did to Ethan. I can't let it scare me into silence." Marissa hesitated. "Then we need to be smart. If they're watching you, they might try to intimidate Ethan too." Rachel nodded. "I'll warn him. But we need to move quickly. If we wait too long, they'll bury us before we can expose them." The next morning, Rachel met Ethan at a diner. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he sipped a cup of coffee. "They came to my apartment last night," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "Two guys I didn't recognize. They didn't say anything, just stood there, staring." Rachel's chest tightened. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. They're trying to scare you into staying quiet." Ethan shook his head. "I don't blame you. But I don't know how much more of this I can take." "You don't have to face this alone," Rachel said. "I'm going to use the video they sent me to prove what they did to you." Ethan's eyes widened. "They sent you the video?" Rachel nodded. "It's a threat, but it's also evidence. If we can tie it to Matthews and Adams, it's another nail in their coffin." Ethan swallowed hard. "You really think we can win?" Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his. "I think we have to try." That evening, Rachel sat with Marissa in her office, analyzing the video. "It's damning," Marissa said. "But how do we trace it back to them?" Rachel's brow furrowed. "Whoever sent this thought they were scaring me. But they made a mistake. They gave us the exact footage we need." Marissa stared at her. "You think it's internal?" Rachel nodded. "Rivera said there's a room where evidence gets lost. If this video came from there, we need to find out who had access." Marissa's expression hardened. "Then we have to go in." Rachel's stomach churned at the thought. Breaking into a police precinct wasn't just risky, it was dangerous. But if it meant getting the evidence to expose Matthews and Adams, it was worth it. "We'll need a plan," Rachel said. Marissa smirked. "You're lucky I'm good at plans." Rachel stared at the precinct from the safety of her parked car, the weight of what she was about to do pressing heavily on her chest. The glowing Riverview Police Department sign loomed against the night sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. Beside her, Marissa adjusted her hoodie and double-checked the small backpack resting at her feet. "This is insane," Rachel muttered. Marissa gave her a sharp look. "We don't have a choice. If that storage room holds what Rivera says it does, it could blow their whole operation wide open." Rachel sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "And if we get caught?" "We won't," Marissa said confidently. "You said Rivera would help us. She's the reason we're even trying this." Rachel nodded, glancing at her phone. Rivera had agreed to leave a side door unlocked during her shift, but nothing more. It was risky, and Rachel knew the officer was putting herself on the line just as much as they were. "Let's go," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. The air inside the precinct was cool and sterile. Rivera had left the door propped open with a trash can, just as she promised. Rachel and Marissa slipped inside, their footsteps muffled against the linoleum floors. "Which way?" Marissa whispered. Rachel pulled out a small hand-drawn map Rivera had sketched during their last meeting. "Down this hallway, past the break room. The storage room is supposed to be in the basement." Marissa peered down the corridor. "It's quiet. Too quiet." Rachel gave her a wry look. "It's a police station, not a haunted house." "Still creepy," Marissa muttered. They moved cautiously, their senses heightened with every creak of the floorboards or distant hum of a vending machine. Finally, they reached the stairwell. "Basement," Rachel said, pointing to the metal door labeled "Access Restricted." Marissa tested the handle, and to their relief, It turned. Rivera really came through, she whispered. They descended the stairs into the basement, where the air grew colder and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The storage room door stood at the end of the hall, locked with a keypad. "Do you have the code?" Marissa asked. Rachel nodded and punched in the numbers Rivera had provided. The lock clicked open, and the heavy door creaked as they pushed it inward. The room was a disorganized mess of shelves, boxes, and file cabinets. Stacks of papers and unmarked evidence bags littered the space, creating a labyrinth of secrets. "This is it," Rachel murmured, scanning the shelves. Marissa pulled on a pair of gloves from her bag and started rifling through the nearest box. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Anything tied to Matthews and Adams," Rachel said, opening a file cabinet. "Complaints, video footage, reports, anything that shows a pattern of misconduct." Minutes turned into an hour as they sifted through the chaos. The sheer volume of files was overwhelming, but Rachel's determination never wavered. "Got something," Marissa whispered, holding up a folder. Inside were printed complaints, all bearing the names of Matthews and Adams. Most were stamped dismissed or unsubstantiated, but the language in the reports painted a damning picture. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation tactics. Rachel's stomach churned as she read through them. "This is enough to show a pattern," she said. Marissa frowned. "But it's not enough to prove criminal intent. We need hard evidence, like recordings or emails." Rachel nodded, moving toward a row of shelves filled with unmarked VHS tapes and flash drives. She grabbed a few at random and slipped them into her bag. "Let's keep looking," she said. As they worked, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway above. "Did you hear that?" Marissa whispered, freezing mid-motion. Rachel stopped, her breath catching. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. "Someone's coming," Rachel said urgently. Marissa shoved the folder into her backpack. "What do we do?" Rachel scanned the room, her eyes landing on a small storage closet in the corner. "In there, now." They slipped into the cramped space, closing the door just as the main door to the room opened. Through the thin slats, Rachel saw a shadowy figure enter, a flashlight sweeping across the shelves. "Matthews," Marissa mouthed, her eyes wide. Rachel's heart pounded as she watched Matthews move through the room, his heavy boots crunching against the floor. He seemed to know exactly where to look, heading straight for one of the file cabinets they had just searched. "What's he doing?" Marissa whispered, her voice barely audible. Rachel leaned closer to the slats. Matthews pulled out a file and flipped through it quickly before pulling a lighter from his pocket. "No," Rachel whispered under her breath. The flame flickered to life, and Matthews held it to the corner of the file, watching as the paper curled and blackened. Marissa grabbed Rachel's arm, her grip tight. "He's destroying evidence." Rachel's mind raced. If Matthews found the folder they'd taken, he'd know someone had been there. They had to get out. But how? Matthews turned suddenly, his flashlight sweeping toward the closet. Rachel held her breath, praying he wouldn't open the door. After what felt like an eternity, Matthews seemed satisfied and left the room, slamming the door behind him. Rachel and Marissa stayed frozen for several moments before Marissa finally whispered, "We need to go. Now!" They emerged from the closet and hurriedly made their way back upstairs, retracing their steps to the side door. Rachel's chest was tight with fear as they slipped into the night air, but relief flooded her when they reached the car. As they drove away, Marissa broke the silence. That was way too close. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tightly. "But we got what we needed. Those files, the tapes, this could be the break we've been waiting for." Marissa nodded, though her expression remained grim. If Matthews was willing to burn evidence, he knows someone's onto him. "We need to move fast before he covers his tracks completely." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Then we won't give him the chance." Back at Rachel's apartment, they laid out the stolen evidence on the kitchen table. Marissa began cataloging the files while Rachel plugged one of the flash drives into her laptop. Her screen filled with folders, each labeled with a date and case number. She clicked on the most recent one and found a video file. The footage was chilling. Matthews and Adams roughing up a man in an alleyway, their voices taunting him as he begged them to stop. Rachel's hands shook as she paused the video. "This is it," she said. "This is the proof we need." Marissa looked over her shoulder. "It's enough to start a storm, but we'll need to back it up with those complaints." Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. "Tomorrow, we take this to the press. If the system won't hold them accountable, we'll make sure the public does." But as she shut her laptop, a single thought gnawed at her. If Matthews and Adams knew they were exposed, how far would they go to protect themselves? Rachel woke to a loud banging at her door. She jolted upright, her heart racing, as the noise echoed through her apartment. The clock on her nightstand read 5:13 a.m. "Who is it?" she called, her voice still thick with sleep. "It's Marissa." Rachel rushed to the door, unlocking it quickly. Marissa stepped inside, her face pale and her eyes darting around nervously. She was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "What happened?" Rachel asked, shutting the door behind her. Marissa handed Rachel her phone. "You need to see this." The screen displayed a video clip from a local news broadcast. The headline read, "Civil rights attorney Rachel Carter under investigation for evidence tampering." Rachel's stomach dropped as the video played. It featured a police spokesperson standing behind a podium, solemnly addressing the press. "We have reason to believe that Ms. Rachel Carter unlawfully accessed restricted police records," the spokesperson said. "An internal investigation is underway." Rachel's hands shook as she handed the phone back. "They're trying to discredit me." Marissa nodded grimly. "It's a classic move. They're scrambling because they know what you have could destroy them. But this also means they're not just playing defense anymore. They're coming for you." Rachel clenched her fists. "Let them. We're going public today. The sooner the evidence is out there, the harder it'll be for them to bury it." Marissa hesitated. "Rachel, this isn't just about them discrediting you. If they're desperate enough, they might try something worse." Rachel swallowed hard. "Then we don't have time to waste." By mid-morning, Rachel and Marissa were sitting in a newsroom conference room, facing a small team of investigative reporters. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Rachel laid out the stolen evidence on the table. "This is everything we've gathered," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Complaints, video footage, internal reports. It proves that Officers Matthews and Adams have a history of abuse, and the department has been covering for them." One of the reporters, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Grant, examined the files carefully. "This is explosive," she said, her tone measured. "But going public with this puts you at enormous risk. Are you prepared for that?" Rachel nodded. "The risk is worth it if it means stopping them." Lisa leaned back in her chair. "We'll need time to verify everything. We have to ensure it's airtight before we publish." "How long?" Rachel asked. 3 days, maybe 4, Lisa replied. "We'll move as quickly as we can." Rachel's stomach twisted. Every day they waited gave Matthews and Adams more time to retaliate. That evening, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She was going through her notes when her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Rachel?" His voice was panicked. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, immediately on edge. "They came to my job," Ethan said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "2 guys. They didn't say anything, but they stood outside my office for an hour. Just staring." Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. "Did you call the police?" "And say what?" "That cops are intimidating me?" Ethan's voice cracked. "What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to stay safe," Rachel said firmly. "Lock your doors. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll make sure you're protected." "How?" Ethan asked, his desperation palpable. Rachel's mind raced. I'll figure it out. Just stay where you are and don't answer the door for anyone you don't know. When she hung up, she immediately called Marissa. They're going after Ethan, Rachel said. Marissa cursed under her breath. This is escalating fast. We need to protect him. Rachel thought for a moment. Do you still have that contact at the community legal aid office? The one who works with at-risk clients? Yeah, Marissa said. Why? Call them, Rachel said. See if they can set Ethan up with a safe place to stay until this blow over. Marissa hesitated. Do you really think it'll blow over? Rachel didn't answer. The next morning, Rachel woke to find her car vandalized. Red spray paint slashed across the windshield spelled out a single word: drop it. Her hands trembled as she called the police to report it, knowing full well it was a symbolic gesture at best. When the officer arrived to take her statement, he barely hid his smirk. We'll look into it, he said lazily, scribbling something on his notepad. Rachel crossed her arms. I'm sure you will. The officer tipped his hat. Have a nice day, ma'am. Marissa arrived a few minutes later, her expression darkening when she saw the car. They're getting bolder, Marissa said. Rachel nodded. Which means we're getting closer to the truth. That night, as Rachel sat in her apartment reviewing the files again, the lights flickered. She froze, staring at the ceiling. Then the power went out completely. Her chest tightened as she grabbed her phone, turning on the flashlight. She moved cautiously toward the window and peered outside. The streetlights were still on. It wasn't a neighborhood outage. It was just her apartment. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. It was an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. Hello? A low, distorted voice responded. We warned you. Rachel's blood ran cold. Who is this? The line went dead. Rachel backed away from the window, her heart pounding. She grabbed her bag, threw on a jacket, and headed for the door. As she opened it, she froze. A single piece of paper lay on the floor, folded in half. She picked it up and unfolded it carefully. Written in bold black letters were the words, Last Chance. Rachel's hands shook, but she refused to let fear take hold. She stepped outside and locked the door behind her, her mind racing with plans. If they wanted to scare her into silence, they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong woman. Rachel sat in Marissa's office the next morning, her body still tense from the previous night's threats. Marissa paced the room, gesturing wildly as she vented her frustrations. They cut your power, they vandalized your car, and now they're calling you with veiled threats. This isn't intimidation anymore, it's outright harassment, Marissa said, her voice sharp. I know, Rachel replied, her tone calm but steely. And that's why we can't stop. The fact they're escalating means they're scared. Marissa stopped pacing and faced her, crossing her arms. You're playing it cool, but last night must have shaken you. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. It did, but fear is their weapon, Marissa. If we let it work, they win. I won't give them that satisfaction. Marissa sighed, her expression softening. All right, so what's the plan now? Rachel leaned forward. We protect Ethan, push the reporters to move faster, and dig deeper into Matthews and Adams. We don't stop until every stone is turned. Marissa nodded. I'll call Lisa again, see if her team's made any progress. But Rachel, watch your back. These people don't play fair. That afternoon, Rachel met with Officer Rivera at a small park on the edge of town. Rivera wore plain clothes and sunglasses, her demeanor tense and cautious. This is the last time I can meet with you, Rivera said without preamble. Things are getting too hot. Rachel frowned. What's happened? Word's spreading around the precinct, Rivera said, glancing around nervously. People know someone's leaking information. I've been getting side eyes from everyone, including people I thought I could trust. Rachel's stomach tightened. Do they know it's you? Not yet, Rivera said. But if they find out... She trailed off, the implication clear. I'm sorry, Rachel said sincerely. I never wanted to put you in danger. Rivera waved a hand. You didn't. Matthews and Adams did. I just don't want to end up like Daryl Harris. Rachel's breath caught. You know about him? Rivera nodded grimly. Everyone in the department does. He was a loudmouth, always challenging the wrong people. And then one night, bam! Hit and run! Case closed. Rachel's heart pounded. Do you think it was deliberate? Rivera looked her in the eye. I think a lot of things, but thinking and proving are two different animals. Later that evening, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, sifting through the files she and Marissa had stolen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Grant. We're close. Stay ready. Rachel exhaled, relief washing over her. The reporters were almost done verifying the evidence. Once the story broke, the tide would turn. Her thoughts were interrupted by another buzz. This time, it was Ethan. Thanks for the safe house. Feeling better? Rachel smiled. Marissa had arranged for Ethan to stay at a secure location through the legal aid network. It was one less thing to worry about. But as she put her phone down, a gnawing feeling crept into her chest. Rivera's words about Daryl Harris haunted her. If Matthews and Adams were willing to cover up something that severe, what else were they hiding? She turned back to the files, flipping through reports, complaints, and evidence logs. Suddenly, one name jumped out at her. Marissa King. Rachel froze, staring at the document. It was an internal memo, noting a meeting between Matthews, Adams, and Marissa dated 3 weeks before Rachel's arrest. Her breath caught as a wave of disbelief washed over her. Marissa had never mentioned meeting with them. Why would her best friend have any connection to the very people they were fighting? Rachel grabbed her phone and called Marissa. Hey, what's up? Marissa answered casually. We need to talk, Rachel said, her voice tight. Marissa hesitated. Okay. About what? About why your name is in a police memo with Matthews and Adams, Rachel said bluntly. There was a long silence. Where did you see that? Marissa asked finally. I found it in the files we took, Rachel replied. Why didn't you tell me? Marissa sighed. Rachel, it's not what you think. Then explain it to me, Rachel demanded. Fine, Marissa said. They called me in for a meeting, said they wanted to clear the air. They knew you and I worked together and thought I could convince you to back off. Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. And you didn't think to tell me? I didn't want to worry you, Marissa said quickly. I told them I wouldn't get involved, and that was the end of it. Rachel's mind raced. Was Marissa telling the truth? Or was there more to the story? Why should I believe you? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Because I've been by your side this whole time, Marissa said firmly. Everything I've done has been to help you, Rachel. If I were working with them, don't you think they'd already have what they need to stop you? Rachel exhaled slowly, her mind still spinning. This doesn't sit right with me, Marissa. If there's more you're not telling me… There isn't, Marissa interrupted. I swear. Rachel rubbed her temple, the tension pounding behind her eyes. All right, but if I find out you're hiding anything else… I'm not, Marissa said, her voice softening. You know me, Rachel. You know where I stand. Rachel wanted to believe her, but doubt had already planted its seed, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. As the night wore on, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pieces weren't fitting together. She'd always trusted Marissa implicitly, but now? She opened her laptop and pulled up the memo again, scanning it for more details. Something about it felt off, like it was too convenient, placed there to sow discord. Could it be a plant? A deliberate attempt to drive a wedge between her and her closest ally? Rachel leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. If Matthews and Adams were behind this, they were more cunning than she'd given them credit for. And if Marissa was lying… Rachel closed her laptop and stared out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. One thing was clear. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. Rachel spent most of the night poring over the memo. It felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, yet she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling it had created. Marissa's explanation was plausible, but Rachel's instincts screamed that there was more to the story. By dawn, Rachel decided, she needed answers, and she wouldn't find them by sitting on the sidelines. Later that morning, Rachel walked into the Riverview News building, where Lisa Grant and her investigative team were based. Lisa greeted her with a firm handshake and led her to a quiet corner of the newsroom. "We're making progress," Lisa said. "The evidence is solid, but we're still digging into a few details." Rachel hesitated, then slid the memo across the table. "I need you to verify something for me. This document, can you confirm where it came from?" Lisa frowned as she scanned the memo. "This was part of the batch you brought us, right?" Rachel nodded. Lisa gestured to a nearby technician. "Hey, Mike, can you take a look at this? I need to know if it's authentic or doctored." Mike took the memo and left, leaving Rachel and Lisa alone. "Why does this matter?" Lisa asked, her sharp eyes studying Rachel. Rachel sighed. "The memo links my closest ally to the officers we're trying to take down. If it's real, it changes everything." Lisa leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "And if it's fake, it means someone's trying to manipulate you." "Exactly," Rachel said. 2 hours later, Rachel's phone buzzed. It was Lisa. "The memo is real," Lisa said without preamble. "But something about it feels off." Mike traced its metadata. It was added to the system 3 days ago, not when it was supposedly created. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. 3 days ago. Who had access to add it? "Someone inside the department," Lisa replied. "This was planted, Rachel. Someone's trying to turn you against your team." Rachel's mind raced. If the memo was a deliberate attempt to sow distrust, it meant the people behind it knew how close she and Marissa were. "Thank you, Lisa," Rachel said, her voice firm. "This changed everything." Rachel found Marissa at her office, sitting behind her desk with a stack of legal briefs in front of her. "We need to talk," Rachel said, shutting the door behind her. Marissa looked up, her expression tired. "I told you everything, Rachel. I don't know what else you want me to say." Rachel pulled up a chair, her voice low but urgent. "The memo was planted, Marissa. Someone inside the department created it 3 days ago." Marissa blinked, her brow furrowing. "What? Are you sure?" "Lisa's team verified it," Rachel said. "Whoever did this wanted me to doubt you." Marissa exhaled sharply, leaning back in her chair. "Then it's working, isn't it? You've been treating me like a suspect ever since you saw that memo." Rachel flinched at the truth in Marissa's words. "I had to be sure. This fight is too important to risk being blindsided." Marissa stood, her voice rising slightly. "Rachel, I've stood by you through everything. I've put myself in danger because I believe in what we're doing. And you still questioned my loyalty?" Rachel stood as well, meeting Marissa's gaze. "I'm sorry, but after everything we've uncovered, trust isn't something I can give blindly." Marissa shook her head. "You don't have to give it blindly. You just have to give it." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "You're right, and I do trust you. But this isn't over. If Matthews and Adams planted that memo, it means they're desperate. We need to figure out what they're planning next." That evening, Rachel called Officer Rivera. "I need one more favor," Rachel said. Rivera sighed on the other end. "You're pushing it, Carter." "I know," Rachel replied, "but this is important. Can you pull any recent communication logs involving Matthews and Adams? Emails, phone records, anything that might show what they're up to?" Rivera hesitated. "You're asking me to dig into something that could cost me my badge. And if we don't stop them, they'll keep abusing their power," Rachel said. "You said you wanted to make a difference. This is how." Rivera was silent for a moment. "Fine, but if this goes south, you owe me." The next day, Rivera texted Rachel. "Meet me, usual spot." Rachel arrived at the park 20 minutes later. Rivera was already there, sitting on a bench with a plain manila envelope in her lap. "This wasn't easy to get," Rivera said, handing over the envelope. Rachel opened it and found printouts of emails and call logs. One email caught her attention immediately. Subject: Backup Plan. From Officer Matthews. To Internal Group. Rachel's eyes scanned the email, her heart pounding as the words leapt off the page. "If Carter and her team release anything, we'll have our own story ready to discredit her. Evidence is being prepped to connect her to misconduct charges. Spread the word and stick to the script." Rachel's chest tightened. "They're building a counter-narrative," she said aloud. "If we go public, they'll try to destroy my reputation." Rivera nodded. "They've done it before. People who cross them don't just lose their cases, they lose their careers." Rachel clenched her fists. Not this time. Back at her apartment, Rachel sat with Marissa, reviewing the latest findings. "They're scared," Marissa said, tapping the email. "This proves it. They're scrambling to protect themselves." Rachel nodded. "And that means we have the advantage. But we need to move carefully. If they think we're about to expose them, they might escalate." Marissa leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" Rachel's gaze hardened. "We go public, but we don't do it on their timeline. We control the narrative. And if they want to discredit me, they'll have to try a lot harder." Rachel stared at the stack of evidence on her kitchen table. It was all there: the complaints, the video footage, the planted memo, and now the damning email from Matthews. It was more than enough to expose the corruption. But if she played it wrong, the backlash could bury her before the truth even had a chance to breathe. Marissa sat across from her, watching quietly. "You've got that look," she said finally. "What look?" Rachel asked, not glancing up. "The I'm about to do something risky and probably insane look," Marissa replied. Rachel smirked. "It's not insane, it's strategic." Marissa leaned back in her chair. "All right? Lay it on me." Rachel tapped the email with her finger. "This is their plan. They're building a counter-narrative, and they think it'll work because they assume we'll play defense. But what if we don't?" Marissa frowned. "Go on." "We need to force their hand," Rachel said. "Make them show their cards before they're ready. If we control the timing, we control the narrative." Marissa's eyes narrowed. "And how do we do that?" Rachel's lips curved into a determined smile. "We make them think the evidence is about to go public. All of it." By the next morning, Rachel and Marissa had put their plan into motion. Rachel reached out to Lisa Grant, briefing her on the next steps. "We're not actually releasing anything yet," Rachel explained. "We're just going to make them think we are." Lisa arched an eyebrow. "That's risky. If they call your bluff—" "They won't," Rachel interrupted. "They're already paranoid. This will push them over the edge." Lisa nodded slowly. "All right, we'll play along. What do you need from us?" "Announce an exclusive investigative piece," Rachel said. "Tease it on social media, hinting at police corruption and misconduct. Make it clear that it's coming soon, but don't give an exact date." Lisa smiled. "You're not just a lawyer, Carter. You're a strategist." Within hours, the newsroom's social media accounts began lighting up. A teaser post appeared on their feeds. "Exclusive investigation. Corruption in Riverview PD. Coming soon. Stay tuned." The reaction was immediate. Comments poured in. Speculation ran wild, and the post was shared hundreds of times. Rachel watched the chaos unfold from her office, her phone buzzing with messages from friends and colleagues. The teaser had done its job. Everyone was paying attention. But Rachel wasn't focused on the public. She was focused on Matthews and Adams. She knew they were watching, and she needed them to feel cornered. That evening, Rachel received an unexpected call from Officer Rivera. "You're stirring the pot," Rivera said without preamble. "That's the idea," Rachel replied. "Have you heard anything?" Rivera hesitated. "There's chatter in the precinct. Matthews and Adams are on edge. They've been meeting behind closed doors all day." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What about their counter-narrative?" They're scrambling to finish it, Rivera said. But here's the thing, they don't know exactly what you have. That's why they're panicking. Rachel leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. Good. Let them panic. The next morning, Rachel and Marissa waited outside a local cafe, sipping coffee and watching the street. Rachel had arranged a meeting with Ethan, hoping to reassure him as the pressure mounted. When Ethan arrived, he looked better, more relaxed than he had in days. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from Rachel. "What's the update?" Rachel explained the plan, emphasizing how close they were to forcing a breakthrough. Ethan listened intently, nodding along. "I just want this to be over," Ethan said quietly. "I'm tired of looking over my shoulder." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his. "It's almost over, Ethan. I promise." Before she could say more, her phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Carter," a familiar voice sneered. It was Matthews. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want?" "I think you know," Matthews said. "You've been making a lot of noise, stirring up trouble." Rachel's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "If you're calling to intimidate me, you're wasting your time." Matthews chuckled darkly. "You're good, I'll give you that, but don't think for a second you've won." The line went dead. Rachel lowered the phone, her mind racing. Matthews wasn't bluffing. He was rattled, but he was also dangerous. Later that evening, Rachel and Marissa reconvened at Rachel's apartment. They spread the evidence across the table, reviewing it one last time. "They'll retaliate," Marissa said, her voice steady. "You know that, right?" Rachel nodded. "They already are. But once the story's out, it won't matter. They won't be able to hide anymore." As they worked, Rachel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Rivera. "You need to know something," Rivera said, her voice tense. "Matthews and Adams are planning something big. They've called in favors, pulling strings to get out in front of this. I don't know what they're planning, but it's not good." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Do you think they'll try to destroy the evidence?" "I think they'll try to destroy you," Rivera said bluntly. Rachel took a deep breath. "Then, we'll have to be one step ahead." That night, Rachel finalized the trap. She instructed Lisa Grant to set a public release time for the story. Noon the following day. The announcement would go live at 8 a.m., giving Matthews and Adams only a few hours to act. The timing was critical. If Matthews and Adams tried to retaliate, it would expose their desperation. If they didn't, the story would be published before they could execute their counter-narrative. As Rachel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake Rivera's warning. Matthews and Adams were dangerous, and they were cornered. Tomorrow would be the tipping point one way or another. The morning sun cast a golden glow across Riverview, but for Rachel, the day felt heavy with tension. At exactly 8 a.m., the newsroom's official accounts posted their final announcement. "Breaking at noon. Riverview PD corruption exposed. The truth comes out." Rachel stared at the post on her phone, the weight of it settling in her chest. Across town, the wheels were already turning. At 9:15 a.m., Officer Rivera called. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "They know," she said. "Matthews and Adams. They're scrambling to shut this down. I heard Matthews on the phone. He's trying to fast-track a warrant against you." Rachel froze. "For what?" "Does it matter?" Rivera snapped. "They'll fabricate something if they have to. Carter, they're desperate." Rachel gripped her phone tightly. "Then the plan's working." Rivera hesitated. "Be careful. People like them, when cornered, don't play by the rules." By 10:30 a.m., Rachel sat in Lisa Grant's office at the newsroom. The energy in the building was electric, with reporters finalizing edits and preparing the evidence for publication. "You've got 2 hours," Lisa said, handing Rachel a cup of coffee. "If they try anything, we'll back you up. The story is airtight." Rachel nodded, though her chest felt tight. I just hope it's enough to stop them. It will be, Lisa said. You've done the hard part. Now, let the truth do the rest. At 11 a.m. the trap was sprung. A low-level precinct insider tipped off Lisa's team that Matthews and Adams had initiated a series of frantic calls and last-minute meetings. Word spread that Matthews had ordered files destroyed, while Adams was seen leaving the station with a briefcase. They're trying to cover their tracks, Marissa said, pacing in Rachel's apartment. It's classic damage control. Rachel nodded, her eyes glued to her phone. If they destroy anything, it'll only make them look guiltier when the story drops. Marissa stopped pacing. Do you think they know they've already lost? Rachel didn't answer. Deep down, she knew men like Matthews and Adams rarely accepted defeat. At 11:40 a.m., Rivera called again, her voice frantic. They're coming for you, she said. What? Rachel asked, her heart pounding. Matthews and Adams. They're heading to your apartment. I don't know what they're planning, but you need to leave now. Rachel's pulse quickened as she grabbed her laptop and bag. I'm on my way out. But as she reached the door, she heard the unmistakable crunch of tires in the driveway. She froze, peering out the window. A black sedan had pulled up, and Matthews stepped out, his jaw set and his eyes cold. Rachel's mind raced. She couldn't let them intimidate her, or worse, force their way in. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and dialed Lisa. They're here, Rachel said, keeping her voice steady. Lisa's tone turned sharp. Where are you? At my apartment, Rachel said. Matthews and Adams just showed up. Stay calm, Lisa said. I'm sending a camera crew and calling the police. Whatever happens, don't open the door. Rachel nodded, her heart pounding. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Matthews pounded on the door, his voice carrying through the walls. Carter, open up! Rachel stayed silent, her phone recording everything. This is your last chance, Matthews shouted. If you think you're untouchable, you're wrong. Rachel's stomach churned, but she refused to give in. She stepped back, ensuring her laptop and bag were hidden in case they forced their way inside. Then, she heard a second car pull up. She peered through the blinds to see a news van screech to a stop, cameras rolling as Lisa's team spilled out. Matthews turned, his face twisting in anger. What the hell is this? Lisa stepped forward, holding her microphone like a weapon. Officer Matthews, care to comment on the allegations of corruption within the Riverview Police Department? Matthews's jaw tightened as Adams emerged from the car, glaring at the reporters. No comment, Matthews snapped, but Lisa wasn't backing down. We have evidence linking you to multiple cases of excessive force and abuse of power, she pressed. Would you like to address these accusations? The growing attention drew neighbors out of their homes, phones in hand, recording the unfolding scene. Matthews and Adams exchanged a glance, realizing they were cornered. You'll regret this, Matthews growled, before shoving past Lisa and storming back to his car. The sedan sped off, leaving a crowd of stunned onlookers and a triumphant Lisa. Rachel opened the door cautiously, relief flooding her as Lisa approached. That was close, Rachel said, her voice shaking. Lisa nodded. But it worked. You've got them running scared. At 12 p.m. sharp, the story went live. Every piece of evidence Rachel and her team had gathered was laid bare. The complaints, the videos, the emails, and the testimonies. The footage of Matthews and Adams intimidating Rachel was added as a final blow. The response was immediate. Social media erupted. Hashtags demanding accountability trending within minutes. Local news stations picked up the story, amplifying its reach. By 1:30 p.m., the Riverview Police Department issued a statement announcing an internal investigation into Matthews and Adams. By 3:00 p.m., both officers were placed on administrative leave. That evening, Rachel sat in her living room, watching the news coverage with Marissa by her side. Rivera had called to thank her, saying the department was in chaos, but change was finally on the horizon. Ethan texted a simple message. "Thank you for everything." Rachel exhaled deeply, the weight of the battle lifting slightly. "You did it," Marissa said softly. Rachel shook her head. "We did it, but the fight's not over. There's more work to do." Marissa smiled. "Then let's get to it." As Rachel stared at the glowing city skyline outside her window, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Matthews and Adams had tried to silence her, but their actions only fueled her resolve. The truth had come out, and for the first time in years, Riverview was waking up to the possibility of justice. Rachel's fight for justice was just the beginning. Her courage to stand against corruption sparked a ripple effect, inspiring a community to demand accountability and transparency. While the battle was far from over, her story proved that even the most broken systems could be challenged and changed with determination and truth. If you believe in the power of resilience and the importance of holding those in power accountable, subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that inspire action, spark conversations, and remind us that justice is worth fighting for. Let's make a difference, one story at a time.